To today's video. Today is Saturday, November 2nd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about a brand new poll from the Des Moines Register and Ann Seltzer in the state of Iowa showing Kamala Harris, yes, you heard that correctly, Kamala Harris with a 3-point lead over the former president in this quote-unquote battleground state. The 2024 cycle has been full of surprises for a variety of different reasons, whether it was the dropping out of our president of the United States, swapping out the vice president at the top of the ticket, and a number of different changes that have really come to warp our perception about this ever-evolving presidential race. But nothing more shocking, might I add, over the past month has occurred than this poll drop this evening. Now, first and foremost, I apologize if you're tired of hearing from me today. I've already uploaded 2 videos, and I actually have an additional one slated for 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We are in the final 3 days, so expect a lot of content out from me, but I actually have to put that one on hold. I'll probably release it sometime around 9:30 or 10 p.m. Eastern Time. This video needs to come out first because this is breaking news. I was actually at dinner with my parents just an hour ago. 7 p.m. Eastern Time was the set title, date and time for the poll drop for Ann Seltzer. I completely expected it to be Donald Trump plus 6, Donald Trump plus 7, Donald Trump plus 8, and it was only going to be really good news for Kamala Harris if the lead was about 2 or 3 points. But never, ever could anyone have imagined that the poll this evening put Kamala Harris with a 3-point lead in Iowa, a state Donald Trump won by 8 points twice. Now, if you're new to the discussion around the Ann Seltzer and Des Moines Register poll, and you don't exactly get the hype around why everyone treats it like this gold standard, if you go on Twitter, you'll see so many people talking about how this poll was a big part of their Saturday evening, while some people probably are out on Halloween weekend, or some people are doing both. A lot of us here on the election side of things are watching to see what the numbers actually come in and say. And it's very interesting because this poll drop really did break a lot of people's perceptions about the state of Iowa. And just for additional context as to how accurate Ann Seltzer and the poll itself has been in the past 10 years, we can go all the way back to 2012, where in 2012 they said Barack Obama would win Iowa by roughly 5 points. Now, I actually want to give Ann Seltzer a bit more credit. In 2008, right before the Iowa caucus, she was one of the only pollsters out there to predict that Barack Obama, not Hillary Clinton, would win in the Iowa caucus. And it completely defied the expectations. You saw many reputable pollsters out there saying Hillary Clinton was on track to win the caucus. She did not win the caucus. Fast forward to 2012, she ends up being one of the most accurate pollsters in the state for the state of Iowa's presidential top line. Then in 2014, we saw that the Republicans were on track to win the Iowa Senate race, but some polls had showed it far closer. It was a big deal for Democrats that we saw the Republicans ahead by 7 points, but Democrats swore that it was an anomaly, that it was not going to be the case, and that ultimately the Democrats were going to come through or come closer than a 7-point lead for Republicans. Well, eventually the election occurred, and it ended up being Republican plus 8. Fast forward to 2016, when the polls were saying Iowa was neck and neck. You can look back on Real Clear Politics and many other polling averaging sites that showed Iowa within a point or 2 on the average. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were in a close and competitive race until they weren't, when Ann Seltzer said that Donald Trump would win the state by roughly 7 points. He went on to win it by 9. In 2018, she missed the mark slightly. She predicted that Democrats, Fred Hubble, if you remember my YouTube channel back in 2018, I actually covered the Iowa governor's race here. We said that Democrats would win there too, largely in part because this poll had said the same thing. And we had seen that the Democrats led by roughly 2 points in the Iowa governor's race. Ended up being a 3-point lead for Republicans, a 5-point swing, but nonetheless, still something that had been historically quite accurate. Then you fast forward to the 2020 Senate race. Republicans were up by 4 in the final poll from Ann Seltzer. They ended up winning by 7. And also in 2020, in the presidential race, what she also was able to clock earlier than most of the other polling sites, in fact, many of them didn't even make the mark in the final stretch of 2020, was that Donald Trump would win Iowa by roughly the same amount that he won by in 2016. She said Trump would be up by 7, he won it by 8. And she also was able to indicate that the Senate race would be closer than the presidential race. Some people would have expected the opposite. Some people had thought that Donald Trump would underperform Joni Ernst. That's not the case. Joni Ernst and Teresa Greenfield were in a competitive race. Although Joni Ernst ended up winning, the Republicans again were predicted to perform worse in the Senate race than the presidential race. And then fast forward to 2022. A lot of people saw that Chuck Grassley was up just 3 points against his Democratic opponent in Iowa. Republicans spent a lot of money trying to save that race in the final stretch, money that could have been better spent elsewhere. Ultimately, though, we found that in Iowa, that poll that showed Chuck Grassley ahead by 12 in the final stretch ended up being correct, and the race here was decided by 12 points to a T. This is one of the best polls we have out there, one of the most accurate pollsters in the nation for really any battleground state. And so that's why it was so groundbreaking that Kamala Harris has a lead in this new poll. Now, I need to first say, I do not think Kamala Harris will win Iowa, but this is a phenomenal result no matter how you cut it. Even if you were to give every single undecided voter and RFK Jr. voter and third-party voter that is in this poll to Donald Trump, at best, he's at 53 to 47. 53 to 47, meaning that would be a 2-point reduction in support from the 2020 presidential election. That, at base value, is good enough for Kamala Harris, and she wins the presidency on that. But in the event that actually the 3-point lead is true, the results here would be completely out the wazoo. I kid you not. If this 3-point lead is correct, I can show you the electoral map in really swift strokes here. Iowa would be blue, obviously, but so would Ohio, and North Carolina, and Georgia, and Florida, and Texas, and Arizona, and Nevada. And if it came down to it, based on what this shift actually tells us, it's a 12-point shift from 2020. It would mean states like Alaska would end up going blue in this cycle. Obviously, I don't think that's going to be the case, but it is fascinating at the bare minimum to explore a reality in which it is correct, because it just goes to show how shocking this poll is and how good of a result it is for the vice president. And when you take a look too, betting market odds I've completely thrown out the window as an indicator as to who will win the election, but you can see people are taking this very seriously. Right at the beginning of today, we saw before the poll drop that Donald Trump hit a new high on Polymarket, a 67% chance of victory. It went down a little bit leading up into today, but overall it was roughly a 25-30 point lead that had fluctuated over the past week in favor of Donald Trump. Well, just because of this poll alone, you can see a very clear dip and drop. Now Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, just 12 points separates them. And while this isn't phenomenal for Kamala Harris, the betting markets, I don't really think, have that much validity. I do think a lot of people sold their Donald Trump share after seeing this poll here because it actually has never been wrong. That's the problem here for Republicans. They were looking to this poll to hopefully put them up by 11 or 12 points. They knew that in the previous poll, Ann Seltzer had said Donald Trump led by 3, but they wrote it off. They thought it would be similar to the 2022 poll that said Republicans were up by 3 in September, ended up being up by 12 on Election Day. But Kamala Harris leading in this final poll, I genuinely could not even have fathomed it earlier on this morning to even think that this would be an outcome. Every single prediction had said the margin of Donald Trump's victory in Iowa is an indicator of what this race is going to do. But no one, and I mean no one, could have predicted that Kamala Harris would be leading in the Des Moines Register-Seltzer poll. This really matters. And so when we take a look at some of our other national headlines and some of our other national polls, it is shocking to me that we could be in a circumstance where the national head-to-head shows Kamala Harris up 1 point and the Iowa Des Moines Register poll shows Kamala Harris up 3 points. Keep in mind, in 2020, Donald Trump won Iowa by 8, but won the national popular vote by 4.5. It is clear there should be a difference there and a discrepancy, but Iowa should be, in theory, voting about 13 points to the right of the national popular vote, what actually would be in line with some of the predictions that Republicans have been putting out, but that's not what we saw whatsoever. I think my takeaway from this is that it does reaffirm many of the beliefs that we have seen from Republicans, or Democrats rather, across the country, that Kamala Harris is starting to solidify some of her support in the Rust Belt regions of the United States, in the Great Plains regions of the United States, that she is able to take some of these states where previously Donald Trump had the upper hand in, that now Kamala Harris is expected to win. Good examples are states like Wisconsin, for instance, where Kamala Harris 58 to 42, Michigan 65 to 35. Now, these are just examples of states where, overall, I'm not going to use the percentages because I don't think them to be true, where Kamala Harris, based on what this poll tells us, is going to be in a stronger position, right? When we see some of these data points out of the states now, I'm not going to say that, Donald Trump is going to lose Alaska, lose even Iowa. He's not going to lose that. But what is interesting about this is that based on where we are right now and based on these data out of the very, very accurate pollster here, it bodes really good news for the Kamala Harris campaign. If this was correct too, if you were just looking at margins, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania would all be likely blue states. I think what we might be on track to see is a high end of a lean blue state in Wisconsin, high end of a lean blue state in Michigan, and a midpoint, about a 2-3 point victory for Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania, should these numbers actually hold up. And I do think many of the undecideds in the Iowa poll are going to break in favor of the former president. But regardless of that, this is the best piece of information that the Kamala Harris campaign could have likely seen right before the election. This is a huge truth nuke, right? 3 days before the election. I know we like to throw that term around, playfully, because it's this idea that there's one poll out there that's going to rule them all. There's one poll out there that says X candidate is ahead, X candidate is going to do well. And obviously, we can't extrapolate all polls in saying that this is going to be the definitive marking moment, that Kamala Harris is going to win the presidency, the definitive moment at which, Kamala Harris is able to take a battleground state. I don't think that's where we're at. I think what we do find in this poll, though, is a very interesting result that really cannot be ignored. Cannot be ignored by anybody, because it does show Kamala Harris in a much more positive position than really ever before, and stuff like that just doesn't happen too often. It is very rare that we see polls as strong as this one showing a result as against the grain, as I might put it, or against the norm, completely shattering the expectations in the state of Iowa. But in a way, Democrats, I'm sure, invite it. They look at this and say, okay, right, Iowa might be this shocking state. It might not be a Kamala Harris victory. But even if Donald Trump is losing Iowa by 1 or 2 points, mark my words, he loses the election, right? And so this is why I think a lot of people, especially those in the betting markets, again, I'm not here to say that they're valid in saying that, Donald Trump has a 56% chance of victory. I don't think the percent chances on the betting markets are really going to be too reasonable between now and Election Day. But there's a reason. A lot of people are throwing away their Donald Trump bids. You can even see here that it goes from, 94% to 82% for Donald Trump. I expect it to build back up slightly. This is really something. 2 days before the election, I kid you not, there is very little wiggle room and very little time for much to change the trajectory of the races. But this also shows that in the final stretch, when undecideds are making that decision, Kamala Harris holds ahead. And when you break down the poll and what we actually can expect to see out of some of it, it is really quite interesting. Donald Trump had previously enjoyed the support of Iowa's independent voters in the lead up to this election, but independent women now support Kamala Harris by 28 percentage points. Independent women, a huge demographic group that the Harris campaign has made an intentional effort through the efforts of Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, a wide range of endorsements from political world to celebrity world to local world. The Democratic campaign has had a coordinated effort to win over independent women that might have been fine with Nikki Haley but are rejecting the idea of Trump but couldn't stomach voting for Kamala Harris. They are now bringing them in to the fold here. They are now bringing them in as real, viable voting bases for the Democratic electorate, and that's what this poll captures. It shows that while there is some slippage in this poll, even here, with Kamala Harris up by 3 from 2020 amongst minority voters in Iowa, white voters make up a significant chunk of the electorate here, and that's where Kamala Harris is really excelling. Independent men break for Trump by a smaller margin. It's not even enough to keep it grounded. Harris won the support of the majority of voters age 65 or older. She'd be the first Democrat to do that in a very long time. And among senior women, she wins them 63 to 28. Donald Trump just leads senior men by just 2 percentage points. It really is just a fascinating result, one that I just can't even grapple with in this cycle. In 2016, it said that Trump was going to win 46 to 39. And while the percentages weren't fully accurate, the margins here were largely correct. In 2020, they said Trump would win 48 to 41. The results were 53 to 45. It was near identical to what it actually was. And so to see this poll today showing Kamala Harris with the advantage, I genuinely mean it has completely warped my perception and understanding of where we are as an American electorate, as where we are in Iowa, as where we are in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and all of these states, because it really is something that has broken the election internet. It has completely warped everybody and how they interact with this race. And so here's what I think. Tomorrow, we will get the final set of New York Times and Siena College polls. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the New York Times and Siena College polls for just the simple reason that sometimes they show some really interesting results. For instance, they'll have Trump up 2 nationally, but Kamala Harris winning in all 4 states, the Rust Belt and Nevada. That doesn't make sense. That just simply isn't going to happen. And so sometimes I do think they provide some really meaningful commentary. We'll discuss it tomorrow, whether it's good news or bad news for either candidate. I just think, this was a huge piece of information, a very high quality pollster who I do think in the end will be wrong as to who she predicts will win, but she hasn't been wrong yet. And so she will likely be able to prove any of us wrong should she want to do so. And I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if we just saw Iowa shift quite tremendously in favor of Kamala Harris. Not enough to win it, obviously, but enough to keep it in a point of contention, which means a lot of other states are going to be far bluer than what we expect. And so tracking this will be quite the task. It will be very interesting to watch. And here's the thing, too, that we completely missed in our marketing conversation around all of this. is that Iowa has now become one of the closest states on the national presidential margin. And I know that sounds really surprising. But when you take a look at the, expectations and who's leading in the polls, you can see that in some of these battleground presidential races, if we go to the poll tracker, you will find that in the state of Iowa, it ends up being the closest state besides the core 7. Not Maine's 2nd district, not Ohio, not New Hampshire, not Minnesota, not Florida, not Virginia, but Iowa. What was Trump plus 10 in 16, Trump plus 8 in 20, now holds Trump up by just 2%. And now another piece of information I'm sure you just simply did not want to know, but actually does help inform the conversations we have around states like this. There was a brand new poll that was released in Kansas just a week ago that I didn't cover because I didn't think it was too meaningful, and I will have to admit, these polls typically in Kansas just don't happen frequently enough for me to say, this holds super strong validity. But it is the Fort Hays State University, Docking Institute of Public Affairs. Essentially here, this is a pollster that back in 2020 nailed the margin of victory for Donald Trump. On Election Day, the margin said Donald Trump would win by 12.9%. When you take a look at that final poll here, they said Donald Trump would win by roughly 14 points in the head-to-head race in the state of Kansas. Donald Trump went on to win Kansas by 14.9%. And so this time around, what are they saying? Not a 14-point victory, but a 5-point victory for Donald Trump. Do I think he'll win Kansas? Absolutely. Do I think she'll be within 5 points? No. But this being the gold standard poll for Kansas, showing a reduction in support that is like what we see in Iowa, a 10-point shift from 2020 in Kansas, a 12-point shift from 2020 in Iowa, it aligns. And while it may not fit the understanding that we currently have of the nation, it does fit where reality likely is. And that Kansas is going to be closer than 20. Iowa is going to be closer than 20, and very possibly this could be the sign, Kansas and Iowa's polls could be the sign that Kamala Harris's improvement amongst white voters across the nation will help her win the election and will help her win a number of battleground states. And although I don't think this shock poll will be right in predicting that she will actually win Iowa, I do think it goes to show just how much she has improved upon and what the final stages of the campaign look like for the Harris campaign. Because arguably, they look very good. The turnout numbers amongst women across the nation, the panic and fear rampant within the Republican Party with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, himself fearful. There are so many takeaways here, and this only solidifies our understanding that in the final stretch, and in terms of momentum, it is Kamala Harris's race right now, and it might lead her to victory on Tuesday, in the time where she truly needs it the most. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.